My own son handed me eviction papers at 2:30 in the morning. He stood in the doorway of the home I built, wearing a robe I'd paid for, and told me I was a broken old man who would get nothing. What he didn't see was my head of security, a man he'd never met, watching silently from the shadows of the study. And he had no idea that the $75 million lawyer he just hired to destroy me was already on my payroll. But before I tell you how it ended, with that lawyer walking into the room and my son's world collapsing around him, I need to know something from you. Have you ever trusted someone with your whole heart, built them up, given them everything, only to have them look you in the eye and try to break you? Just drop a simple yes or no in the comments below. Because what happened next in that hallway, in the dead of that night, changed the course of my life and erased my son's future forever. And your answer tells me I'm not alone. My name is Arthur. I'm 68 years old. For 42 of those years, I built something from nothing. I started with a single truck and a back that wouldn't quit hauling scrap metal. That one truck became a fleet. The scrapyard became a recycling empire, Vance Reclamation. It wasn't just a business. It was my fingerprint on the world. It put food on the table, sent my 3 kids to the best schools, and eventually it built the 10,000 square foot stone and timber house in the hills that my eldest son, David, was now trying to throw me out of. David, my firstborn, the one I held in my arms and whispered all my dreams to. I saw myself in him, the ambition, the drive. Maybe I saw too much of myself. I brought him into the business straight out of his fancy MBA program. Not at the top, mind you. I made him work the yards, learn the crews, understand the smell of diesel and rust. I wanted him to earn it, and over 20 years I gave him more and more. He became Chief Operations Officer. He had a minority share, 15%. I kept 85%, not out of greed, but because I believed the final handover should be a transition, not a sudden shock. I wanted to be sure the heart of the company, the loyalty to our people, the integrity, would survive me. I was preparing him to take the helm. I told him this often. This will all be yours, David, just steward it well. The peace before the storm, it felt like peace, it felt like success. I was slowing down, sure. A 70-hour week had become 50. I'd had a minor heart scare 6 months prior, just a warning, the doctor called it. It forced me to delegate more to David. I saw his chest puff up with the new responsibility. I was proud. I thought he was finally ready. We had dinners where he'd talk about modernizing, about aggressive expansion, about streamlining the old guard. His language was different, cold, corporate. I'd chuckle, pat his hand, and say, "Don't forget the men in the yards, son. They're the engine." He'd smile, but it never reached his eyes anymore. The disrespect was in the details. He stopped returning my calls about daily operations. He hired a new, slick financial controller without consulting me, a guy named Roland who smelled of expensive cologne and contempt. At the quarterly board meeting, which was just us, my daughter Sarah, and our longtime CFO, Marty, David presented a proposal to sell off 3 of our oldest, most sentimental yards. "They're inefficient, Dad," he said, pointing at a graph. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bonuses." I vetoed it. I saw the flash of irritation, quickly masked. Then 2 weeks before the end, he moved $100,000 from our main operating account into a new innovation fund I hadn't authorized. When I asked, he was dismissive. "It's in the company's name, Father. It's all still in the family. You need to learn to let go." I should have seen it. But a father's love is the world's most effective blindfold. The betrayal didn't come in a boardroom. It came in the vulnerable, quiet dark of my own home. I'd been feeling run down, and my doctor, concerned after my last checkup, suggested a brief overnight stay at the hospital for observation, just tests. I was there for 36 hours. I told David, of course. He seemed concerned. "Get your rest, Dad. I'll hold the fort." I came home, tired but relieved everything was fine. I went to bed early, the deep, dreamless sleep of exhaustion. A pounding on my bedroom door jerked me awake. The digital clock blared 2:17 a.m. I fumbled for my robe, my heart doing a frightened stutter step. I thought it was an emergency, a fire, something with the grandkids. I opened the door. It was David. He wasn't in pajamas. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit like he was heading to a closing. His hair was perfectly in place. In his hands was a thick, legal-sized envelope. Behind him stood two men I didn't recognize, one in a cheap sport coat who looked like a process server, and the other, to my disbelief, was Roland, his financial controller, holding a briefcase. "David, what in God's name is going on? Is everyone all right?" "Everyone's fine, Arthur," he said. He didn't call me Dad. The sound of my own name from his lips in that hour felt like a slap. "We need to talk downstairs, now." Bewildered, I followed him to the grand living room. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the Persian rug, under the chandelier my late wife had loved, and he became a stranger. "Your recent hospitalization has raised serious concerns about your capacity to manage your affairs, and by extension, the affairs of Vance Reclamation," he began, his voice a flat, rehearsed monotone. "The board of directors has convened an emergency session." "What board?" "It's just us and Marty resigned this evening. Sarah has been appointed but is currently recused. That leaves me and Roland as the voting members. We have voted unanimously to petition the court for an emergency order declaring you mentally incapacitated and appointing me as your legal guardian and conservator of the estate." The words hung in the air, nonsensical. I felt the floor tilt. You what? David, this is insane. The doctor said I'm perfectly sound. This is a mistake." He didn't flinch. "The petition is supported by medical evaluation from Dr. Evigan." He handed me a paper. I scanned it, my vision blurring. It was a letter on letterhead from a doctor I'd seen once briefly for a consultation years ago. It was filled with jargon about age-related cognitive decline and poor judgment. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. "This is forged," I whispered, the paper trembling in my hand. "And this," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken, pulling another document from the envelope, "is a notice of eviction. This house is held in the name of the Vance Family Trust. As the acting trustee pending court approval, I am requiring you to vacate the premises by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Your personal effects will be packed and stored." I looked from the papers to his face. "My boy, the child I taught to ride a bike." "David, why are you doing this? I was giving you everything." For the first time, the mask slipped. A raw, hungry spite flashed in his eyes. "Because you were taking too long," he snapped, his voice rising. "Because you cling to your rusty old empire like a security blanket. The men in the yards," he mocked, his voice a whiny imitation of mine. "They're dinosaurs. The company is stagnant because of you. You're a broken old man living in the past. And emotionally, you've been a void since Mom died. You have nothing left to give anyone. So yes, I'm taking it. I'm modernizing, and you get nothing. You'll have a nice, quiet allowance, a small apartment somewhere out of the way." He looked me dead in the eye, a cold, final verdict. "It's time for the generation that actually understands the world to be in charge, Arthur. You're obsolete." The words didn't just hurt, they dissolved something inside me. The love, the hope, the legacy, it all crumbled to ash in my chest. I was looking at a corporate raider, not a son. I felt shattered, ruined. In that moment, I believed him. I felt old and broken and utterly, terrifyingly powerless. The two strangers stared at the floor. Roland allowed himself a small, smug smile. David thrust the eviction papers into my hands. "Be out by 5. He turned and walked out, his echoing footsteps the only sound in the cavernous house. The door clicked shut. I stood there in the middle of the room, in the silent, expensive tomb I'd built, holding the papers that declared me a non-person. The despair was a physical weight pushing me toward the floor. But then, as I stood there drowning, a single, clear thought broke the surface like a lifeline. He moved too fast. The arrogance of his speed, that was his flaw. He was so sure of his victory, so confident I would just crumple, that he didn't cover his tracks. He left a trail a mile wide. The discovery that changed everything wasn't some dramatic break-in. It was a quiet anomaly in my own living room, noticed by the one person in that house still loyal to me. Her name is Alara. She's been my housekeeper and, frankly, a guardian angel for 20 years. She de-raised my kids as much as I had after my wife passed. She saw David and the men arrive that night. She didn't interrupt, but she watched from the kitchen hallway. And after they left, as I stood frozen in my shock, she did something practical. She made me a cup of strong, sweet tea, sat me down, and said, "Mr. Arthur, that man Roland was here earlier today while you were at the hospital. He was in your study for almost an hour. I didn't think it was my place to say anything until now. My study, the heart of my private world, the desk where I kept my personal files, the safe with my late wife's jewelry, the old ledgers from the first yard. I went in feeling like a ghost in my own life. Nothing seemed out of place at first. My desk was neat. The computer was off. But then I saw it. The small framed photo of my wife and me on our wedding day, which always sat squarely on the left side of the desk, was now on the right, a hair's breadth out of place. Someone had moved it. My hands were still unsteady as I lifted the frame. Beneath it, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a tiny circular smudge, a lens, a nanny cam. It was so small, so professional. David must have had Roland plan it to look for documents, for bank details, for anything to use against me. But the fool had placed it pointing at my leather armchair, not at the desk. He'd recorded the wrong spot. With a fury that pushed back the despair, I pried it loose. It was a wireless model with local storage. I didn't know how to access it, but I knew someone who would. I called my grandson, Liam, David's own son. 16, a tech wizard and disillusioned with his father's new, flashy persona. He came over immediately, no questions asked. Within minutes, he had the footage downloaded to his laptop. We sat together in the study, the glow of the screen the only light. The footage was time-stamped from the afternoon of my hospital stay. It showed David and Roland, sitting in the two armchairs, their backs mostly to the camera but their voices crystal clear. The old man is at the hospital. "It's the perfect cover," David said. "The Evigan letter is ready. I had it drafted from the template we used for the Clayton merger. The signature is a decent forgery," Roland replied, his voice oily with satisfaction. "Good. The emergency petition is filed with the court. Judge Reimer's clerk is amenable. We'll get the ex parte order before he's even discharged. And the buy-sell clause in the original partnership agreement. The one for $1 in case of breach of fiduciary duty. He's forgotten it exists. When we control his shares, we trigger it against him and take the rest for a song." David laughed, a cold, ugly sound. $1 for his life's work. Poetic. By the time he knows what hit him, he'll be declared incompetent. He won't be able to protest. "And the house?" Roland asked. A pause. I saw David's hand gesture dismissively on the screen. "The trust is the easy part. Evict him. Let him feel what it's like to have nothing. He spent my whole life telling me I had to earn everything. Well, I'm earning it now by taking it." They clinked glasses, my brandy from my decanter. The toast was to Vance too. I watched it, my blood turning to ice. The grief was gone. In its place was a cold, pure, and determined rage. This wasn't just greed, it was a meticulously planned coup, a patricide of legacy. They weren't just stealing from me, they were erasing me. And they'd recorded their own conspiracy. My emotional devastation was now a fossil, preserved under layers of hardened resolve. I had the truth. Now I needed a weapon. The plan began not with a shout, but with a whisper. I couldn't fight David in the emotional, reactive way he expected. That would play into his narrative of an unstable, erratic old man. I had to be smarter. I had to be the architect he thought I was too senile to be. My revenge wouldn't be a hammer blow. It would be a system failure, a silent, legal lockdown triggered by his own actions. First, I secured the evidence. Liam helped me make multiple copies of that nanny cam footage. We put one on a secure cloud drive only I could access, another on a physical drive that went into a safe deposit box under a dummy corporate name, and a third I mailed to myself in a sealed envelope, the poor man's copyright, creating a verifiable date stamp. Then I reached out to the only two people I knew I could still trust implicitly, Marty, my old CFO who resigned, and my daughter, Sarah. I met them separately in a quiet, unassuming diner 20 miles from town. Marty was furious. He forced me out, Arthur. Said if I didn't sign a quiet resignation and a generous severance, he'd allege I'd been cooking the books for years. He had Roland create a paper trail. I was going to call you in the morning. I showed him a minute of the footage. The color drained from his face, then returned as a flush of vindication. "That little viper, what's the play?" Sarah was heartbroken, then steeled. "I knew he was getting cold, Dad, but this is monstrous." She confirmed David had called her for a board vote, but when she refused to agree to the petition, he told her she was recused due to emotional attachment. She'd been cut out, not recused. She was in. Our alliance was small: a betrayed grandfather, a disgraced accountant, a sidelined daughter, and a tech-savvy teenager. It was enough. The core of the plan was a two-pronged legal trap. Prong one was my declared competence. David's entire scheme rested on that emergency order of incapacity. I needed to vaporize it before it could land. That required a pre-emptive strike of undeniable proof of my sound mind. I remembered something, buried in the mountain of estate planning documents my first, long-retired lawyer had drawn up decades ago: a springing power of attorney. It was an obscure clause that stated if I was ever subject to a petition for guardianship, a separate notarized declaration of sound mind, made after the petition was filed, would trigger a different pre-selected power of attorney, nullifying any emergency appointment. The successor it named was David. It was my brother Walter, a retired engineer in Florida who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. David never knew it existed. I'd forgotten it myself. Prong two was the financial and corporate lockdown. Marty knew every bylaw, every clause in our operating agreements. He identified the buy-sell for cause, clause David had so smugly referenced. But Marty found its mirror, a clause that allowed the majority shareholder, me, to force a buyout of a minority shareholder for gross misconduct or fraud, at a price determined by an independent auditor. The penalty for filing a false legal claim against the company was specifically listed as misconduct. The plan was set. Step 1. I would not move out. I would act defeated, compliant to buy time. Step 2. I would secretly visit a legal predator, a lawyer so formidable his mere presence on a docket made opposing counsel blanch. Step 3. We would file my declaration of sound mind and a motion to dismiss David's petition, accompanied by a sworn affidavit from my personal doctor and the damning nanny cam footage. Step 4. Simultaneously, Marty, reinstated by my authority as majority owner, would call an emergency board meeting, a real one, and pass a resolution to exercise the buy-sell clause against David for fraud, freezing his assets tied to the company. Step 5. We would let David walk into the mandatory settlement conference believing he held all the cards, and then spring the trap in front of the one audience he craved respect from, the whole family. The tool was the law. The bait was my apparent surrender. The stage was a mediation room. I spent 3 days playing my part. I called David, my voice trembling with what he took for weakness. "David, please, can we talk about this? The house, your mother's things are here." He was chillingly cordial. "We can have her things packed and sent to you, Arthur. There's nothing to discuss. The law is the law. Be out by 5 tomorrow or the sheriff will assist you." He hung up. I allowed a smile, the first real one since this began, to touch my lips. He'd taken the bait. The next morning, instead of packing, I put on my best suit. Liam drove me, using back roads, to a sleek downtown high-rise. My appointment was with Alistair Croft. His name was whispered in legal circles with a mix of awe and fear. He won a $75 million verdict against a pharmaceutical giant last year. His retainer was astronomical. I paid it in cash, from an account David didn't know about, an old rainy day fund from the first yard sale. Croft was a man in his 60s with ice-gray eyes and a stillness that commanded the room. I laid it all out: the business, the son, the forged letter, the nanny cam, the springing POA. I played him the audio. He didn't react, just took meticulous notes. When I finished, he steepled his fingers. "Mr. Vance, what is your desired outcome?" I looked out his window at the city I'd helped build. "I want my company back free and clear. I want my house secure. I want him removed from every position of authority, every document, and I want him to understand completely that he did this to himself. No drama, just the inexorable application of consequence." Croft nodded, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "A quiet annihilation." "I appreciate the elegance. We'll need a full medical evaluation immediately. I know a neurologist who can see you this afternoon. The declaration of sound mind will be filed by close of business. The motion to dismiss his petition will follow at 8 a.m. tomorrow. With the footage attached as Exhibit A, we will also file a civil suit for fraud, fiduciary abuse, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." That will trigger an automatic asset freeze on any company holdings he controls. Do you consent? I do. It was set in motion. That afternoon, I underwent a 4-hour battery of cognitive tests. I aced them. The neurologist wrote a glowing report. Mr. Vance exhibits the mental acuity and executive function of a man 20 years his junior. My brother Walter, bewildered but loyal, was on a plane that evening. By the time David's sheriff was supposed to arrive at 5 o'clock the next day, he was instead served with a thick sheaf of papers from the county courthouse, my motion to dismiss, Croft's imposing name on the cover page, and a notice of a mandatory settlement conference in 3 days' time. The eviction was stayed indefinitely by a judge who had just seen the nanny cam transcript. I got the call from David an hour later. The veneer was gone, replaced by sputtering, chaotic rage. What is this? Who is Croft? This is nonsense. You can't afford this. I kept my voice calm, weary. The court seems to think it's worth considering, David. We'll talk at the settlement conference. I hung up while he was still shouting. For the next 3 days I rested. I let Croft and Marty work. The emergency board meeting was held. With Sarah's vote and my proxy, Marty was reinstated. The resolution to initiate the buyout of David's shares for cause passed. An independent auditor was appointed. The gears of the machine I'd built, now turned against its saboteur, began to grind with silent, impersonal force. The day of the reckoning arrived. The settlement conference was held in a sterile, oak-paneled room on the 10th floor of the courthouse annex. It was meant for mediation, not drama, but that day it became my theater of justice. I arrived early with Sarah and Marty. Croft was already there, a monolith in a tailored suit, reviewing a file with the calm of a man about to order breakfast. We took our seats on one side of the long table. David arrived exactly on time, with Roland and a young, anxious-looking lawyer I didn't recognize, clearly not the high-powered counsel he'd wanted. He strode in, a brittle confidence in his step. He'd expected to see a broken old man, a public defender maybe. Seeing Alistair Croft froze him mid-stride. His eyes widened, flicking from Croft's impassive face to mine. I offered a small, neutral nod. The confusion on his face was the first course of my revenge, and it tasted exquisite. He composed himself, taking the seat directly across from me. "Father, I see you've scraped together some last-minute theatrics. It won't change the facts. The medical evidence is clear." Before I could speak, Croft did, his voice a dry, quiet rumble that nonetheless filled the room. "We'll see." That was all. The mediator, a weary-looking woman, began the proceedings. David's lawyer started with a recitation of their petition, painting a picture of a failing patriarch, a company in peril, a necessary, painful intervention. He mentioned the concerning medical evaluation from Dr. Evigan. Croft waited for him to finish. Then he opened a simple leather folder. "Your petition," Croft began, "is predicated on 2 fictions. The first is my client's mental incapacity. The second is your client's fiduciary good faith. We will dispense with both." He slid a document across the table. "This is a notarized declaration of sound mind from Arthur Vance, executed yesterday, triggering a pre-existing springing power of attorney that appoints Mr. Walter Vance as his representative. This document, filed with the court this morning, legally nullifies the basis for any emergency guardianship." David snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it. This is a relic. It's not valid." "It is, and the court has already acknowledged it by staying your eviction order," Croft said evenly. He slid another packet. "This is a full neuropsychological evaluation conducted yesterday by Dr. Amanda Silver of the University Hospital, concluding Mr. Vance is of superior cognitive functioning for his age. And this," he said, placing a third document down with a soft tap, "is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Evigan stating he never evaluated Mr. Vance for cognitive decline, and that the letter you submitted is a forgery. He is prepared to testify to that effect, and to file a criminal complaint for identity fraud." David's face was now pale. Roland had shrunk in his chair, studying the grain of the table as if it held the secrets of the universe. "As for the second fiction," Croft continued, his voice dropping a degree, becoming almost conversational, "your client's good faith." He took out a small, sleek audio player. We have an audio recording obtained from Mr. Vance's private study, timestamped the afternoon of his hospitalization. The voices are those of David Vance and Roland Gent. He pressed play. The room was deathly silent as the familiar, hateful conversation spilled forth. The old man is at the hospital. It's the perfect cover. The Evigan letter is ready, the signature is a decent forgery. $1 for his life's work. Poetic. David's own voice, cold and plodding, filled the space where his dignity was meant to be. I watched his face. I saw the blood drain away completely, leaving a waxy, ashen mask. His eyes darted to Roland, who refused to look up. He looked at Sarah, who stared back at him with tears of disgust in her eyes. He looked at Marty, whose expression was pure, unvarnished contempt. Finally, his gaze landed on me. In that moment, he wasn't my son. He was a stranger caught in the stark, unflattering light of his own wretchedness. He saw no anger in my eyes, no triumphant smile, just a calm, final assessment. The look you give a problem that has just been solved. The audio finished. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the building's air conditioning. Croft spoke into the void. Based on this evidence of conspiracy and fraud, we have this morning filed a civil suit against David Vance and Roland Gent. All company assets under their control are frozen. Furthermore, he said, removing the final set of documents, as the true majority shareholder of Vance Reclamation, Arthur Vance has called a valid board meeting. The board has voted to exercise the company's buy-sell clause for cause, initiating the compulsory purchase of David Vance's 15% shareholding at a fair market value to be determined by an independent auditor. Given the grounds for cause, fraud against the company, the valuation is expected to be nominal. Additionally, you are hereby removed from all positions within the company, effective immediately. He wasn't finished. He placed one last, single-page document on the table, sliding it slowly until it stopped right in front of David. This is a summary page from the updated Vance Family Trust and last will and testament of Arthur Vance, executed this morning. You are listed here, Mr. Vance, under Section 4, Disposition of Assets to Disinherited Parties. Croft paused, letting the word disinherited hang in the air. Your previous share of the estate has been revoked in its entirety. It has been redistributed to a newly formed charitable foundation in your mother's name, dedicated to supporting trades education for underprivileged youth. You receive nothing. Not a share, not an heirloom, not a token. David was trembling now, a fine, violent shake. He looked from the disinheritance notice to the audio player to me, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. The public execution was complete. It hadn't happened with shouting or violence, but with the soft, crushing weight of incontrovertible law and his own recorded words. The people in the room, his sister, his father's old friend, the mediator, even his own panicked lawyer, were all witnesses to his total unraveling. Finally, he found a hoarse, shattered whisper. "Dad, please, I was wrong. I was scared. It was Roland, he pushed me, The time for Dad has passed, David," I said, my own voice steady, quieter than his. "You made that choice at 2:30 a.m. You are now a legal adversary who attempted to defraud me. All communication will go through Mr. Croft." I stood up, adjusting my cufflinks. I looked at the mediator. "I believe our position is clear. We are open to discussing the terms of his surrender and the dismissal of any further frivolous actions, but the core facts are not negotiable." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked towards the door. Sarah and Marty fell in beside me. Just as my hand touched the cool metal of the doorknob, I heard Croft's voice delivering the last perfect line. "Oh, and Mr. Vance, the district attorney's office has been provided with a copy of the recording and the forged document. They've opened a file. Expect a call from investigators regarding felony fraud charges. I'd advise you to secure your own counsel, a good one this time." I didn't look back. I walked out, leaving the shell of my son in that quiet room, surrounded by the ruins of the future he'd tried to steal. The aftermath wasn't a single event. It was a cascade of karmic accounting, each consequence landing with the dull, final thud of a tombstone. The legal and financial machinery, once set in motion, did its work with cold efficiency. The civil suit for fraud and fiduciary abuse was settled within 6 months. David, facing the prospect of the nanny cam recording being played for a jury, had no defense. The judgment required him to repay the company for every dime he'd misdirected into his innovation fund, plus punitive damages. The total came to $1.2 million. To pay it, he had to liquidate his investment portfolio, sell his Porsche, and empty his children's college savings accounts. His wife, upon learning the full extent of his treachery, not just against me, but against their own family's future, filed for divorce. She got primary custody of their 2 kids, Liam included, and a hefty chunk of what was left of their marital assets. The house in the gated community went on the market. The criminal investigation bore fruit. The forgery of Dr. Evigan's letter was a slam-dunk case. David and Roland were both charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery. Roland, in a desperate bid for leniency, rolled on David, providing emails and texts that detailed the entire scheme. David took a plea deal to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security prison, with 3 years of probation to follow. He lost his MBA license and any chance of holding a corporate officer position again. Roland got a year, suspended, and was barred from working as a CPA. The company buyout was the most poetically just. The independent auditor, after reviewing the damage David's attempted coup had caused, the legal fees, the operational disruption, the breach of trust, valued his 15% share at exactly $1. The legal clause he'd planned to use against me was used against him. For a single dollar paid from the petty cash drawer, Vance Reclamation bought back every share he owned. He was expunged from the corporate records, and the disinheritance stood ironclad. My new will and the restructured trust were masterpieces of legal precision crafted by Alistair Croft. David's name appeared only once, in the section stating he was expressly to receive the sum of $1, so that it cannot be claimed he was overlooked. The bulk of the estate, the business, the house, the investments, were placed in a trust for Sarah and her children, with provisions for the employees and the charitable foundation in my wife's name. The foundation, Aliner's Promise, is now funding vocational scholarships for dozens of young people. His legacy became a footnote in a story of charity. My redemption wasn't about getting richer, it was about getting peace. With David's toxic presence excised, the company flourished. Marty came back as CEO, and we promoted from within, rewarding decades of loyalty. The business is more prosperous and humane than ever. I go in 3 days a week not to work but to have lunch with the men and women in the yards. I remember their names. They call me Mr. Arthur and they mean it with respect, not fear. I still live in the house on the hill. It doesn't feel like a mausoleum anymore. It's filled with the laughter of Sarah's kids, with the smell of Alara's cooking. I sit in my study, in the same leather armchair, and I look at the space where that tiny camera was hidden. It's a reminder not of the betrayal but of the resilience it sparked. As for David, his is a pathetic fate. He was released from prison to a halfway house. He works as a data entry clerk for a plumbing supply company, a job he got through a Ray entry program. He lives in a small, rented apartment. His children, under the guidance of their mother, have limited, supervised contact with him. Liam, my tech-savvy grandson, wants nothing to do with him. David is a ghost of his own making, obscure, broke, and utterly alone. I heard through the grapevine he tried to get a job as a manager at a fast food chain. They did a background check and turned him down. Karma has a long memory and a perfect hiring record. One quiet evening last week, I was in the garden, watching the sunset paint the hills in oranges and purples. Sarah brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she simply put her hand over mine and squeezed. In that silence, in that simple gesture, I felt it all. The victory, the loss, the enduring love that survived the poison. It was enough. It was more than enough. So what did I learn through all this? I learned that trust is a precious thing, but it is not a suicide pact. I learned that sometimes the most righteous action isn't forgiveness, but the meticulous, unyielding defense of what is rightfully yours, your dignity, your legacy, your peace. I learned that God doesn't like ugly and the universe has a way of balancing the books, but sometimes it needs a steady hand to hold the pen. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? Someone you built up who then tried to tear down everything you made? What would you have done standing in my shoes at 2:30 in the morning holding those eviction papers? Would you have crumpled? Or would you have found that cold, clear spark of fight? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this story of standing up for what's right, of an old man finding his strength and using his own wisdom to protect his life's work, resonated with you, then hit that subscribe button. You're not just subscribing to a channel, you're joining a community that believes in justice, in backbone, and in the idea that it's never too late to set things straight. Stories like this of quiet strength and deserved consequences are waiting for you here every week. Stay strong.